Hi everyone. The composer that I picked to talk about this week is named Gustav Holst, and his name sounds very German, and his family was several generations before him from Germany, but he's actually a British composer. He lived from 1874 to 1934, and he was a performer. He actually played trombone, which is what I play. Kind of unusual. Composers tend to play piano, but he played trombone. He was a teacher of music and also a composer. And he is best known for one particular work, which is called The Planets. And The Planets is a symphonic suite written for orchestra, so a suite meaning a collection of movements. So he wrote a movement about each of the planets. He did not write one about Earth, and at the time he wrote it, Pluto was not considered a planet. When I was a kid it was, so it was like, oh, the planets is missing Pluto, but I guess Pluto's no longer considered a planet. So there is a movement for every planet except Earth, so there are 7 movements. And they don't exactly come in the order that the planets come in the solar system. We studied the solar system, I believe, in cycle 2. So the movements are slightly out of order just for kind of dramatic purposes and what order the music sounds good in. But there is one for all the planets except Earth, and they each have as their inspiration the Roman god whose name is associated with that planet. So the first one that I picked to listen to is called Mars, the Bringer of War. So Mars obviously is not the first planet in the solar system closest to the sun, but Holst put it first just for kind of dramatic reasons. So Mars, the Bringer of War, and it is very violent, terrifying sort of depiction of war. The piece was written between 1914 and 1918, and I believe Mars was the first movement written, and some people have said that the way that Holst is depicting war in terms of its violence and horror rather than kind of a more heroic quality was that approach was inspired by seeing the horror of World War I, but it was actually composed before World War I, so that's not quite accurate, but it is a very intense and violent depiction of war. And one example of that is just how loud it gets at the end. We've been studying dynamics with the tin whistle this week, and the loudest dynamic that we saw was 2 Fs, double forte or fortissimo. If I recall correctly, at the end of Mars, at the end of this movement, Holst actually indicates 4 Fs, so quadruple forte, or I guess you'd call that fortissimo. So incredibly loud, super intense, and that is something that you see during the later Romantic period and into the 20th century. Like the extreme dynamics that we study with the tin whistle are 2 Ps for pianissimo, very soft, and 2 Fs for fortissimo, or very loud. But you'll see sometimes in later Romantic and 20th century music, you'll see 3 or 4 Fs for extremely loud, or 3 or 4 pianos for extremely soft. So just really going for the full range of expression that's possible with very loud or very soft dynamics. So that's Mars, very, just violent and horrific and kind of frightening. I think another thing that makes it feel very unsettling is the time signature, which we haven't studied yet. I think we do that in the next couple of weeks. One of the things the time signature of a piece tells you is how many beats are in a measure, kind of grouped together. Like our Yankee Doodle song, this cycle is in 4/4 time, meaning it has 4 beats in a measure. Mars is pretty unusual in classical music, not totally unprecedented, but pretty unusual in that it's in 5/4 time. So there are actually 5 beats in a measure. And I think that odd number of beats in a measure just makes it feel sort of unsettled and uncomfortable and strange, and so that contributes to the unsettling feeling that Holst is going for in depicting war. And another thing that gives it a very insistent quality and a lot of forward momentum is this little rhythmic idea that occurs right at the beginning, and it occurs for almost the entire piece. It just keeps repeating and repeating, and that is this little rhythm. Da 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 da. That rhythm just keeps coming back over and over and over. That's called an ostinato. It's just like a repeating short little musical idea that just keeps coming back. So I think that gives it a, maybe it almost sounds like a machine gun or something, but a lot of forward motion and just a very insistent sort of quality. So that is Mars, the Bringer of War. And then the other movement I picked is one of probably the other best known movement from this piece, which is the fourth movement called Jupiter, the Bringer of Jollity. So I think Holst actually did not like when the piece got broken up into separate movements. He thought all the movements belonged together and it should be played as one cohesive piece with all 7 movements played as written. But the reality is that it does sometimes get broken up the way that we're listening to it, just kind of cherry picking movements out of it, because they do stand alone really well. So the fourth movement, Jupiter, I think is just a lot of fun. It has several nice melodies in it, and kind of contrasting. It's really lively and exuberant at the beginning, and then a bit more solemn and kind of noble in the middle section. And that that melody in the middle section may be familiar to you. I'm not sure how well known it is, but it has been used in several instances as the melody for different hymns. So like it actually occurs in my family's hymnal in the Lutheran Church. Holst himself used it for a patriotic hymn in Britain a few years after he wrote The Planets. So that melody may be familiar to you, and if it is, that might be where it comes from. But I just think this piece is a lot of fun, or this particular movement. But that's kind of an introduction to these 2 movements of The Planets by Holst. If you like it, check out the other movements. I just think it's a really fun piece. Easy to listen to. The movements are just 5 or 10 minutes long, so it's pretty manageable little chunks. So check those out if you enjoy this. But I would say Holst, one way in which he's an influential composer, I think that he had an influence on film composers. I didn't mention last week in the video about Richard Strauss that I think that Strauss also was kind of admired and picked up by different film composers. Like if you think of John Williams, some of his movie scores. If you listen to Also sprach Zarathustra from Strauss, maybe it sounds a bit like, you could kind of hear how it gets used, that style of music gets used by film composers. Holst was influenced by Strauss, and I think Holst in turn has been influential on film composers. Something like Mars especially really sounds like something that could be almost straight out of a John Williams score. So that's kind of a neat way that I think Holst has been influential on other composers. He was definitely influential on the British composers who came after him as well. But I think in our kind of popular music today, or more widely consumed music, like film music, I think you can hear his influence there. But that's Gustav Holst, a British composer from the late Romantic and early 20th century.